In the glittering world of New York's elite bridal boutique, a frail elderly woman stands outside, staring at a wedding dress with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. When the impeccably dressed manager has security remove her from the premises, he thinks he's simply maintaining the store's prestigious image. But what the security cameras capture next will shake the foundations of a 20-year-old tragedy. Behind the polished glass and perfect mannequins lies a heartbreaking secret. A mother denied the chance to say goodbye, a daughter's last wish unfulfilled, and a wedding dress that was never worn. As the truth slowly unravels, three strangers will discover that some wounds never heal and some love transcends even death itself. Follow this emotional journey of redemption, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more heartbreaking true stories. Drop a like if this touched your soul, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The fine snow was dancing through the air when Lily crossed the street, her weathered hands clutching an old faded purse against her chest. At 73, her steps were careful on the icy sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. Her brown coat, frayed at the shoulders and missing 2 buttons, did little to shield her from the December chill that had descended upon New York City that afternoon. She came to a stop directly in front of Elise Bridal, the most prestigious wedding dress boutique in the state. Through the immaculately polished glass, white mannequins smiled coldly, adorned with glistening dresses and delicate lace veils that cost more than Lily's monthly social security check. Her breath created small clouds against the window as she stood there, completely still, for minutes that stretched like hours. Inside her pocket, her trembling fingers tightened around something small and precious. A single tear escaped down her weathered cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Nobody noticed. "There's some strange woman just standing out there," whispered Vanessa, a blonde client trying on a $12,000 mermaid-cut gown. "She's been there for like 15 minutes. Richard Bennett, the store manager, glanced up from his tablet. His perfectly tailored black suit and meticulously styled hair projected the exact image of sophistication he had cultivated over his 12 years running the boutique. With an annoyed sigh, he handed the tablet to his assistant. "I'll handle this," he said, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply across the marble floor. The security guard straightened as he approached the door. The rush of cold air hit him as he swung it open, but his voice was colder still. "Ma'am, this is not a place for loitering or soliciting. I'm going to have to ask you to move along before I call the police." Lily startled, as if waking from a dream. Her eyes, red-rimmed but a striking blue that must have once been beautiful, widened in alarm. I just wanted to see the dress," she stammered, her voice barely audible above the street noise. Richard didn't wait for her to finish. With a sharp nod to the security guards, they moved forward. They weren't rough with her. That would be bad for the boutique's image. But their firm grip on her elbows left no room for protest as they escorted her away from the storefront. As they moved her, something fell from her pocket and clattered to the sidewalk. A small silver locket with the photo of a smiling young woman inside. Richard didn't even glance down as his foot nudged it away, sending it skittering into the gutter. "Make sure she doesn't come back," he instructed the guards before returning to the warmth of his exclusive world. Across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of a coffee shop awning, Jalen Thomas watched the scene unfold. As the night security guard for the boutique, he wasn't on duty yet, but he'd stopped for coffee before his shift. Something about the old woman's face, the raw grief he'd glimpsed, stirred an uncomfortable feeling in his gut. That night, while reviewing security footage as part of his regular protocol, Jalen noticed something that everyone inside the store had missed. Just before Richard had approached her, Lily had pressed her palm against the glass, directly over one specific dress, a vintage-inspired design displayed slightly away from the others. Her lips had moved, forming words the outdoor camera had barely captured. This was hers. It was supposed to be today. And then, her face had crumbled completely. She hadn't made a sound, but her body had convulsed with the force of her silent sobbing, shoulders shaking violently under that threadbare coat. Jalen froze the image on the screen, the old woman's agonized expression pixelated but unmistakable. His finger hovered over the delete button. The footage would be automatically archived tomorrow anyway. Instead, he saved it to a separate folder. Who was this woman, and why had a wedding dress reduced her to such raw, inconsolable grief? The morning light filtered through the blinds of Jalen's modest apartment as he sat hunched over his laptop, still in his security uniform from the night shift. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he couldn't shake the image of the elderly woman from his mind. Something about her silent grief had latched onto him, refusing to let go. He sipped his lukewarm coffee and replayed the security footage for what must have been the 20th time. This time, he zoomed in closer on the specific dress she had been staring at. It wasn't the most elaborate or expensive piece in the display, a vintage-inspired design with delicate pearl beading around the sweetheart neckline and lace overlay that cascaded down like frozen tears. Unlike the other showpieces that screamed luxury and excess, this dress carried an understated elegance, almost haunting in its simplicity. "What did you see?" he whispered to the screen, watching as Lily's weathered hand pressed against the glass. Jalen checked his watch. He had about 40 minutes before he needed to sleep. Just enough time to make a quick stop at the boutique under the pretense of forgetting his phone charger. The morning shift at Elise Bridal was always busy with deliveries and preparations before the doors opened to the elite clientele at 10 a.m. Jalen nodded to the receptionist, Lisa, who barely looked up from her scheduling software. "Forgot my charger," he said casually, making his way to the security office. Once inside, he pulled up the inventory database on the computer. Every dress in Elise Bridal was catalogued meticulously. Style numbers, designers, pricing, and special notes. He searched for the dress from the window display, scrolling through dozens of entries before finding it. Style Bet E01, name Samantha. Jalen paused. The name matched that of Samantha Matthews, the daughter of Elise Matthews, the boutique's founder who had passed management to Richard years ago, but still owned the company. Below the name was a note in red text. "Original piece from founding collection, not for sale." A chill ran down Jalen's spine as he read further. The dress had been in the same display position for nearly 20 years, cleaned and maintained but never sold. It was practically a monument within the store. His thoughts were interrupted by voices in the corridor. "I still can't believe you actually called security on that poor old woman," said a female voice he recognized as Sarah, one of the senior sales consultants who had worked at the boutique since its opening. Richard's distinctive clipped tone responded, "We can't have vagrants hanging around the storefront. It's bad for business. Our clients pay for an exclusive experience." "She wasn't a vagrant, Richard. She was just an elderly woman looking at a dress. Either way, I prevented a scene. That's what I'm paid to do." Their voices faded as they moved toward the main showroom, but Jalen heard Sarah mutter something else he couldn't quite make out. Curious, Jalen made his way to the sales floor, pretending to check the security cameras positioned discreetly in the corners. Sarah was arranging a display of veils, her movements efficient but distracted. "Hey, Sarah," he said quietly. "Everything okay?" She glanced around before speaking. "That woman yesterday. I think she dropped something. A newspaper clipping." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, carefully unfolding it. "It fell from her bag when they were escorting her out. I was going to run after her, but..." Jalen examined the clipping. It was from the business section of the New York Times, dated 20 years earlier. The headline read, "Local designer opens dream boutique after tragedy." Below was a photo of a younger Elise Matthews, standing proudly in front of the newly opened store, alongside a beaming young woman with striking blue eyes, the same blue as the elderly woman's. The caption identified her as Samantha Matthews, daughter of founder. "She looked proud," Sarah said softly, nodding toward the photo. "The old woman, I mean." Before she started crying, Richard's voice suddenly boomed across the showroom. "Sarah, the Henderson appointment is in 15 minutes. Is the Vera Wang collection ready?" "Coming." Sarah quickly folded the clipping and slipped it into Jalen's hand. "I have to go. Just maybe keep this somewhere safe." As Sarah hurried away, Jalen tucked the clipping into his uniform pocket, his mind racing. Back in the security office, he pulled up the footage once more, this time focusing on Lily's lips as she pressed her face against the window before leaving. He increased the audio, filtering out the street noise as best he could. The microphones were meant for security purposes, not for capturing whispers, but after several attempts, he finally made out her words. "She promised me she'd wear white, not black." Jalen sat back, the fragmented pieces of a mystery starting to form in his mind. Samantha Matthews, a dress named after her, an old woman with the same blue eyes, crying over a wedding gown she could never afford, a newspaper clipping about a boutique opening after a tragedy. Outside the office window, he could see Richard holding court with a wealthy client, gesturing grandly as he showcased a row of designer gowns. His face was animated, charming, a perfect mask that revealed nothing of the man who had so coldly dismissed an elderly woman's grief the day before. Jalen slipped the newspaper clipping into his backpack alongside a hastily scribbled note to himself. Find Lily. Jalen couldn't sleep. His apartment felt too small, the walls closing in as his mind raced with questions about Lily and the mysterious connection to the Samantha dress. After tossing and turning for hours, he gave up and arrived at the boutique 3 hours before his shift was scheduled to begin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty sales floor. Most of the staff had gone home, with only Richard and a few associates finishing up with the day's final clients. Perfect timing. Jalen nodded casually to the daytime security guard, Miguel, who was eager to clock out early. "You're a lifesaver, man. My kid's got a recital tonight," Miguel said, handing over the security pass. "No problem. I couldn't sleep anyway," Jalen replied, his eyes already scanning the boutique for his first destination, the basement storage area. Like most historic buildings in this part of Manhattan, Elise Bridal had an extensive basement, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and storage rooms that held everything from excess inventory to decades of business records. Few employees ventured down there, finding the dim lighting and musty air uninviting. But Jalen had spent countless slow night shifts exploring these forgotten spaces, familiarizing himself with every corner. He waited until Richard's sleek black BMW pulled away from the curb before making his way downstairs, security keycard in hand. The fluorescent lights flickered reluctantly to life as he descended the creaking wooden stairs. The temperature dropped several degrees, and the smell of old paper and fabric preservatives filled his nostrils. "Come on," he muttered to himself, moving purposefully toward the far corner of the basement where the oldest archives were kept. If the Samantha dress had been part of the founding collection, there might be records from that time, perhaps something that could help him understand the elderly woman's connection. The archive room was smaller than he remembered, crammed with metal filing cabinets and cardboard boxes labeled by year. A thin layer of dust covered everything, disturbed only by the occasional visit from accounting staff at tax time. Jalen pulled the chain on the overhead bulb, which cast a sickly yellow glow across the room. His eyes were drawn immediately to something he'd never noticed before, a small antique safe tucked between two filing cabinets. Unlike everything else in the room, it wasn't coated in dust. Someone had accessed it recently. Kneeling before the safe, he examined it closely. It wasn't modern or particularly secure, more decorative than functional, with ornate brass detailing around the dial. Scratched into the top, barely visible in the dim light, was a name: Samantha. Jalen's heart raced. This couldn't be a coincidence. He stood and methodically began searching through the filing cabinets for anything related to Elise or Samantha Matthews. In the third drawer labeled Personnel Historical, he found a slim folder containing employee records from the boutique's opening year. Clipped to one page was a small brass key with a faded tag. His hands trembling slightly, Jalen tried the key in the safe's secondary lock. It turned with a satisfying click. The dial, however, remained an obstacle. He'd need the combination. Thinking quickly, he returned to the folder and scanned the documents inside. There was an employee file for Elise Matthews, listing her as founder and original head designer, paperwork for various opening staff, and then, tucked at the back, a single sheet for Samantha E. Matthews, creative director, honorary. Next to her birth date was a handwritten note, security access 05-22-19. Jalen tried the numbers on the safe dial, holding his breath as he turned to the final digit. The mechanism released with a soft hiss, the door swinging open on well-oiled hinges. Inside was not the treasure trove he'd expected, but rather a single wooden box, lovingly polished and maintained. With reverent hands, he lifted it out and placed it on a nearby desk. The box contained only 3 items: a vintage silver brooch shaped like a lily flower, a leather-bound personal agenda with SM embossed in gold on the cover, and a sealed envelope. The envelope was addressed simply to Mom in elegant handwriting. Jalen stared at the envelope for a long moment. The seal was intact, the paper yellowed with age. Whatever message it contained had never been delivered, never even been read. His fingers hovered over it, temptation washing through him. But something stopped him. This wasn't his story to uncover. Not like this. He carefully returned the envelope to the box, but slipped the agenda into his pocket. That, at least, might provide some answers without violating the sanctity of what was clearly a deeply personal message. As he was about to close the safe, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency staff meeting called for tomorrow morning. Richard got a call from hospital. Elise is asking for him. First time in years. Jalen's brow furrowed. The timing couldn't be coincidental. First, the mysterious elderly woman appears, and now Elise Matthews, the reclusive founder who had disappeared from public life years ago, was reaching out from her hospital bed. He quickly replaced everything except the agenda and locked the safe. As he turned to leave, his foot knocked against something under the desk. A dusty cardboard box labeled Grand Opening. Inside were promotional materials, press releases and photographs from the boutique's first day. One photo stopped him cold. Elise Matthews, cutting a ribbon, flanked by Richard, looking much younger and less polished, and an elderly woman whose face was partially turned away from the camera, but her profile was unmistakable, the same woman who had pressed her weathered hand against the boutique window just yesterday. Across town, as twilight descended on the city, Lily stood before a rickety table at an open-air market in Queens. Her fingers traced the cheap polyester of a discount wedding dress, the $79.99 price tag fluttering in the breeze. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" Lily's fingers closed around the silver locket hanging from her neck, somehow retrieved from the gutter where Richard had kicked it. "No, dear," she replied softly, her eyes distant. "I've already lost everything I wanted to buy." The sterile scent of disinfectant permeated the air as Richard Bennett strode through the hospital corridor, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor. He hadn't visited Elise Matthews in nearly 5 years, not since that explosive argument when she'd accused him of turning her daughter's legacy into nothing but a profit machine. His jaw clenched at the memory. Room 307. The door was partially open, revealing a sliver of the dimly lit interior. Richard paused, adjusting his tie and plastering on the same charming smile he used to sell $15,000 wedding gowns to indecisive brides. He'd expected to feel triumphant, returning as the successful manager who'd quadrupled the boutique's annual revenue. Instead, an unsettling anxiety gnawed at his stomach. He pushed the door open. Elise Matthews, once the formidable fashion icon whose designs had graced magazine covers, looked impossibly small beneath the hospital blankets. Her once vibrant red hair was now thin and white, forming a pale halo around her gaunt face. The numerous machines surrounding her beeped softly in the silence. "Richard," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You came." He approached cautiously, setting his designer briefcase on a nearby chair. "Your doctor called, said it was urgent." Elise's eyes, once sharp and critical, were clouded with cataracts and medication. Yet they seemed to pierce through him as she asked, "Did you see her? The woman who came to the store yesterday?" Richard's blood ran cold. How could she possibly know about that? "I'm not sure who you mean," he lied smoothly. Her skeletal hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping his wrist. "Don't lie to me. Not now." Her breathing became labored, the heart monitor beeping more rapidly. "I saw her. On the news footage." Richard's confusion must have shown on his face. "The security cameras," Elise explained weakly. "I have them. Send footage to my private email, every day. For 20 years. Of course she did. Richard should have known that Elise would never truly relinquish control of her precious boutique, even after stepping away from daily operations. He swallowed hard, deciding honesty might be the safest approach. There was an elderly woman loitering outside the storefront yesterday. Security escorted her away. Elise's eyes filled with tears. "Her name is Lily Jackson. She's Samantha's mother." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Samantha's mother. He'd always assumed Elise was Samantha's only family. In all his years at the boutique, there had never been any mention of another parent. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You're Samantha's mother." Elise's laugh was bitter, ending in a painful cough. "I was her stepmother, Richard. I married her father when Samantha was 12. He died when she was in college." She closed her eyes briefly. "Lily is her biological mother." Richard sank into the chair beside the bed, his mind racing to reassemble the narrative he'd believed for 20 years. The boutique had been built as a memorial to Samantha after her tragic death. That much he knew. But he'd never questioned why the Samantha dress remained permanently displayed, never to be sold. What happened between them? He asked finally. Elise sighed, her frail body seeming to deflate further into the mattress. Samantha fell in love with a man I didn't approve of, a struggling artist with no prospects. We argued, terribly. Her voice cracked. She chose him, moved out, started planning a wedding I refused to attend. Richard remained silent, letting her continue. Lily supported their relationship. She was going to help pay for the wedding even though she could barely afford it. Tears slid down Elise's hollow cheeks. Then the accident happened, 2 months before the ceremony. The heart monitor beeped faster as Elise became more agitated. I was so angry at Samantha for leaving, at her fiancé for taking her, at Lily for siding with them. When Samantha died, she trailed off, closing her eyes against the pain of the memory. I took control, planned the funeral, and I didn't invite Lily. Richard felt a chill run through him. You kept her mother from her funeral. Elise nodded, shame evident in every line of her face. I told everyone she was too distraught to attend, but the truth is, I never called her. I was punishing her for supporting the relationship that I believed had driven Samantha away from me. The boutique, the dress, everything suddenly made horrible sense to Richard. The store was your way of maintaining control of Samantha's memory. It was supposed to be an homage, Elise whispered, but it became something else. A mausoleum. Miles away, in the quiet of his apartment, Jalen carefully turned the pages of Samantha Matthews' agenda. Most entries were mundane, dress fittings, lunch appointments, sketches for designs. But as he reached the final pages, dated just weeks before her death, the entries became more urgent. April 3rd, called Mom again. No answer. Left another message. April 10th, sent Mom Lily invitation to the wedding, praying she comes despite everything. April 15th, wedding dress fitting today. Missing Mom so much. Elise still refusing to speak to me about the ceremony. April 18th, found perfect necklace for Mom to wear at ceremony, silver lily pendant, symbol of forgiveness. The final entry, dated 3 days before her fatal accident, simply read, found Mom's address, going to visit tomorrow. Time to heal this family before I start my own. Jalen closed the agenda, a lump forming in his throat. Whatever reconciliation Samantha had planned never happened. Instead, a silver locket, likely the pendant mentioned in her diary, had fallen from Lily's pocket onto the cold sidewalk outside a boutique built by a grieving stepmother who had denied a biological mother the chance to say goodbye. Back at the hospital, Richard stood by the window, processing everything Elise had told him. "Why now?" he asked finally. "Why are you telling me this after 20 years?" Elise's breathing had become more labored, her voice barely audible. "Because my time is ending, and I saw her face through that window." Her fingers clutched at the hospital blanket. She deserves to say goodbye properly. The dress, it was meant for her daughter's wedding day. Let her see it, please. Before Richard could respond, a nurse entered to check Elise's vitals. Taking advantage of the interruption, he mumbled an excuse about making a call and stepped into the hallway, his mind reeling. For years, he'd run the boutique with clinical efficiency, viewing it as a business rather than the memorial Elise had intended. He'd removed any trace of sentimentality, focusing solely on profits and prestige. And yesterday, he'd had security remove an elderly woman who simply wanted to glimpse the wedding dress her daughter never got to wear. The realization of his cruelty struck him with such force that he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. His phone buzzed with a text from the boutique manager. Customer asking about purchase of the Samantha dress, offering double list price. Approve? Richard stared at the message, a decision crystallizing in his mind. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elise Bridal, casting prismatic rainbows across the polished marble floor. Richard stood motionless before the display featuring the Samantha dress, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't slept since leaving the hospital the previous evening. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from the boutique's most elite clients, all responding to the exclusive invitation he'd sent at 3 a.m., a private showing to mark the retirement of the Samantha dress from display. After 20 years as the boutique's silent sentinel, The gown would be moved to the company's private collection, never to be exhibited again. An end of an era, he'd written in the invitation, a celebration of legacy. But legacy of what? A lie? A stolen grief? A mother denied her right to mourn? The electronic door chime announced Sarah's arrival, 15 minutes earlier than her scheduled shift. Her eyes widened at the sight of Richard still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. "Are you okay?" she asked, setting down her purse. "You look like you haven't slept." Richard turned to her, his customary smooth veneer completely absent. "Did you know?" he asked abruptly. "About Lily being Samantha's mother?" Sarah's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. She sank onto a nearby ottoman, her fingers nervously twisting the end of her scarf. "Not at first," she admitted. "I started here 2 years after the boutique opened, but eventually I heard whispers." She glanced up at him. "I assumed you knew." "I didn't." The words felt like gravel in his throat. "For 20 years, I've been running a monument to a daughter while helping her stepmother erase her biological mother from the narrative." Sarah's expression softened with something akin to pity. "Richard, we've all been complicit in different ways. Elise built this place on her grief, but she twisted it into something possessive." She gestured around the opulent showroom. "This was never about honoring Samantha. It was about controlling her memory." From the doorway, Jalen cleared his throat. Neither had heard him enter. "I found something you both need to see," he said quietly, holding up Samantha's agenda. "And we need to find Lily Jackson now." 30 minutes later, the three sat in Richard's office, the agenda open between them. Sarah wiped tears away as Richard read the final entries aloud, his voice growing hoarser with each word. "She was trying to reconcile them," Jalen said, "and then she died before she could." Richard closed the book gently. "And Elise used that tragedy to build this," he gestured around them, "while ensuring Lily remained excluded. God, we have to fix this." "How?" Sarah asked. "The event is tomorrow. All those society women coming to see the dress retired, like it's some sort of celebrity farewell tour." Richard's face hardened with sudden resolve. "We turn it into what it should have been all along. A tribute to Samantha that includes both her mothers." He turned to Jalen. "Can you find Lily?" Before Jalen could answer, the boutique's front door chimed. Sarah glanced at her watch. "We don't open for another hour." Through the office window, they watched as an elderly woman in a threadbare coat stood hesitantly in the entryway. Lily had returned. Sarah was first to reach the showroom, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble. "Mrs. Jackson," she called, her voice warm with welcome. "Please come in." Lily seemed startled at being addressed by name. Her eyes darted nervously around the luxury surrounding her, clearly expecting to be escorted out again. I shouldn't have come," she stammered, already turning to leave. "Please," Richard said, stepping forward. "We've been hoping to find you." The skepticism in Lily's faded blue eyes was palpable. "Young man, you had security remove me from your sidewalk just 2 days ago." The blunt reminder made Richard flinch. "I was wrong," he admitted. "Profoundly wrong. I didn't know who you were. And now that you do, I'm worthy of entering your precious store?" The steel in her voice belied her fragile appearance. Sarah intervened gently. "Mrs. Jackson, we'd like to invite you to a special event tomorrow. The Samantha dress is being removed from display after 20 years. All color drained from Lily's face. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the silver locket. "You're selling it," she whispered, horror evident in every syllable. "No," Richard assured her quickly. "Never. It's being retired to our private collection. But first, we'd like to hold a proper tribute, with you present." Lily shook her head slowly, taking a step back. "I can't. I won't be part of Elise's performance." The last word dripped with decades of pain. "She kept me from my daughter's funeral. Did you know that? My only child was buried, and I wasn't allowed to say goodbye." The raw grief in her voice silenced them all. In that moment, the opulent boutique with its $1,000 veils and champagne service seemed obscenely trivial against the weight of such profound loss. Jalen stepped forward, the agenda in his hands. "Mrs. Jackson, we found Samantha's diary. She was coming to see you to reconcile before the accident." Lily's eyes fixed on the leather-bound book, her hand trembling as she reached for it, but stopped short of touching it. "May I?" Jalen placed it gently in her weathered hands. She opened it with reverence, her fingers tracing Samantha's handwriting as tears slid silently down her cheeks. "She wanted us all together again," Lily whispered. My beautiful girl always tried to fix everything. A sob caught in her throat as she reached the final entry. She never made it to my house. The accident happened on the way. None of them spoke as Lily closed the diary, holding it against her heart for a moment before returning it to Jalen. "Thank you for showing me this," she said quietly, "but I still can't come tomorrow. This place," she looked around the boutique, "it isn't real. It's Elise's fantasy of who Samantha was. My daughter would have laughed at all this pretension." She turned to leave, but paused at the window display. Her fingers reached out, not quite touching the glass, hovering inches from where the Samantha dress gleamed in the morning light. From this angle, her reflection overlaid the mannequin, creating the brief illusion of Lily wearing the wedding gown herself. "The vitrine isn't a mirror," she murmured almost to herself. "It's a barrier." As they watched her walk away, Lily made a curious gesture. Her right hand traced a perfect circle in the air, palm outward toward the boutique. The same movement Jalen had seen her make on the security footage. "What does that mean?" Sarah whispered. "That circle she made?" Jalen shook his head, but Richard's face had gone very still, recognition dawning in his eyes. "It means," he said softly, "that we've been thinking about this all wrong." The boutique hummed with anticipation as the staff made final preparations for the evening's event. Crystal champagne flutes gleamed in perfect rows on silver trays. White roses, Samantha's favorite according to Elise, adorned every surface, their heady fragrance permeating the air. A string quartet quietly rehearsed in the corner, the melancholy notes of their cellos drifting through the space like ghosts. Richard hadn't slept. His usual impeccable appearance was maintained only through 3 espressos and sheer willpower. After Lily's departure yesterday, he'd spent hours on the phone with the hospital. Elise's condition had worsened overnight, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring Samantha's name in her lucid moments. "The lighting is all wrong," he snapped at a technician adjusting the spotlights focused on the central display, where the Samantha dress stood like a sentinel. "It needs to be softer, less theatrical." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. Everything about this event was theatrical, a carefully orchestrated performance of grief and remembrance that had more to do with the boutique's image than with honoring Samantha's memory. Sarah approached, clipboard in hand. "The first guests will arrive in an hour. The Times photographer is already setting up outside." She hesitated. "Did you have any luck reaching Lily again?" Richard shook his head. Jalen had tracked down Lily's address, a modest apartment in Queens, but their messages had gone unanswered. The circular gesture she'd made still haunted him, though he couldn't articulate why. "Everything needs to be perfect anyway," he insisted. "Even if she doesn't come." Sarah squeezed his arm gently. "Richard, when was the last time you visited Elise?" "Before yesterday, I mean." The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. 5 years ago, after that fight about changing the boutique's direction. And in those 5 years, did you ever wonder why the Samantha dress remained in the window? Why it was never sold, never even moved?" Richard frowned. "It was a memorial piece. Everyone knew that." Sarah's eyes reflected a sadness beyond her years. "It was a promise. Elise told me once, years ago, after too much wine at the holiday party. Samantha had chosen that dress for her wedding, a wedding Elise refused to attend. After the accident, she put it in the window as a promise that one day she'd make peace with what happened." She paused, but she never did, and neither did Lily. Before Richard could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. The morning manager burst in, face flushed with panic. "The dress is gone," she exclaimed, pointing frantically toward the now empty display window. Richard froze, unable to process her words. "What do you mean, gone? It's not there. The window display is empty." The entire staff rushed to the front of the boutique. The central mannequin stood naked, the Samantha dress, the centerpiece of their entire event, nowhere to be seen. "Check the security cameras," Richard ordered, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Now." In the cramped security office, they crowded around the monitors as Jalen rewound the footage. The boutique had been closed between 8 and 9:30 a.m. for a staff meeting to prepare for the event. The footage showed the dress safely on display at 7:58 a.m. At 9:32 a.m., when the first employee returned to the floor, the mannequin was bare. "There!" Sarah pointed to movement at 8:05 a.m. A figure in a brown coat entering through the service entrance, the same entrance the cleaning crew used before opening hours. "That's Lily," Jalen confirmed, zooming in on her weathered face. She moved with surprising purpose for a woman her age, crossing directly to the display window, her path suggesting intimate familiarity with the layout of the boutique. They watched in stunned silence as Lily gently, almost reverently, removed the dress from the mannequin, folded it with practiced hands and placed it in a simple cloth bag. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. She then exited through the same service door, passing within feet of the morning cleaning supervisor, who barely glanced up from her phone. Richard's blood ran cold. She stole it. She actually stole it. Sarah's voice was quiet. Can you steal something that belonged to your daughter? That's not the point. That dress is worth thousands. It's irreplaceable. Richard raked his hands through his hair, his carefully maintained composure crumbling. The event starts in less than an hour. We have 50 of the most influential people in fashion coming to see a dress that's no longer here. Jalen rewound the footage again, studying it closely. Look at how she handles it, he said. Like it's made of glass, like it's sacred. He turned to Richard. She's not stealing it to keep it or sell it, she's borrowing it. For what? Richard demanded. I don't know, Jalen admitted, but there's something else. He pointed to a white rectangle visible on the floor beneath the now empty mannequin. She left something. The three rushed back to the display. There, taped to the platform, was a small handwritten note in elegant, if shaky, cursive. Let her wear it, just for today. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Richard stared at the note, the meaning behind Lily's circular gesture suddenly crystallizing in his mind. The circle wasn't random. It was a wedding ring. A symbol of the ceremony that never happened. Call everyone, he said, his voice strangely calm. Tell them the event is delayed by 2 hours. Richard, we can't, the manager began. Do it, he snapped, already heading for the door. Jalen, you're with me. Sarah, handle the guests when they arrive. Tell them there's been a change in plans. Something more authentic. The winter afternoon was already fading into dusk as Richard's car sped through the streets of Queens, Jalen navigating from the passenger seat. Neither spoke, the gravity of what they might find hanging between them. Lily's apartment building was modest, but well-maintained, Christmas lights framing several windows despite it being only mid-November. Richard took the stairs 2 at a time, his designer shoes slipping slightly on the worn carpet. Apartment 3B. The door was slightly ajar. Richard knocked anyway, his heart pounding. Mrs. Jackson, it's Richard Bennett from Elise Bridal. No response. With a glance at Jalen, who nodded encouragement, Richard gently pushed the door open. The small living room was immaculate, if sparsely furnished. Photos in simple frames covered one wall, a visual history of Samantha from infancy through college. And there, positioned before the window where the last rays of sunlight streamed in, was the Samantha dress, displayed on a simple dressmaker's form. But no Lily. Mrs. Jackson, Jalen called, moving cautiously into the apartment. A soft noise from the bedroom drew their attention. Pushing the door open wider, they found Lily seated on the edge of her bed, pale and disoriented, an empty pill bottle beside her. I just wanted to see her in it, she whispered, her voice slurring slightly. One time before I go. Richard's blood ran cold as he rushed to her side, already dialing 911. The emergency room of Queen's Memorial Hospital pulsed with fluorescent light and barely contained chaos. In the far corner, separated from the general population by only a thin curtain, Richard paced in tight circles, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor with each turn. The Samantha dress hung carefully over his arm, wrapped in the soft cloth bag Lily had used to transport it. How long does it take to pump someone's stomach? He muttered, checking his watch for the 4th time in as many minutes. Jalen, seated in a molded plastic chair nearby, looked up from his phone. The doctor said she didn't take enough to do serious damage. They're being thorough because of her age. Richard nodded, though the reassurance did little to ease the knot of anxiety in his stomach. His phone buzzed with yet another message from Sarah. The event guests were growing restless at the boutique, their curiosity about the delay morphing from intrigue to irritation. Tell them to go home, Richard texted back. Full refunds, this isn't happening tonight. The curtain parted as a tired-looking doctor entered their makeshift waiting area. Family of Lily Jackson? Richard stepped forward, the lie coming easily. Yes, I'm her nephew. How is she? The doctor consulted her clipboard. Stable. The medication she took was mostly mild sleeping pills, not enough for a serious attempt. Physically, she'll be fine with some rest. She lowered her voice. However, I am concerned about her emotional state. She keeps asking about someone named Samantha, saying she needs to finish the ceremony. Richard and Jalen exchanged glances. Can we see her? Jalen asked. Briefly, she needs rest. They found Lily in a curtained-off bay, looking impossibly small against the sterile white bedding. An IV dripped steadily into her arm, and the hospital gown hung loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of their approach. You brought it, she whispered, her gaze fixing on the cloth bag in Richard's arms. Thank you. Richard carefully placed the bag on the foot of her bed. Mrs. Jackson, why did you take the dress? A tear slid down her weathered cheek. I needed to see her in it just once. See who? Jalen asked gently, though he suspected he knew the answer. Samantha. Lily's voice strengthened slightly. Every year on what would have been her wedding day, I imagine her wearing it. For 20 years I've pictured that moment, my beautiful girl walking down the aisle, her hands twisted in the hospital blanket. But I could never see it clearly, because Elise wouldn't let me near the dress, near the funeral, near anything. She looked directly at Richard, her faded blue eyes suddenly fierce. Do you know what it's like to lose a child and not be allowed to say goodbye? To be erased from her story? Richard had no answer. The weight of complicity in that erasure pressed on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. I wasn't trying to kill myself, Lily continued, seeing their concerned expressions. The pills were just to help me sleep after I finished. Finished what? Jalen asked. The ceremony, in my living room. I put on my old dress from my own wedding. I played the music she'd chosen, Pachelbel's Canon. I lit the candles. A smile ghosted across her lips, and I watched her walk down my little hallway in that beautiful dress, just like she would have done. Richard blinked rapidly against unexpected tears. You had a wedding ceremony? For Samantha? Lily nodded. I never got to see her buried. This was my way of laying her to rest, seeing her happy, seeing her complete her journey. Her voice broke. Then I got so tired. I just wanted to sleep afterward. That's all. Outside the curtain, nurses rushed past, responding to some unseen emergency down the hall. The fluorescent lights flickered momentarily, casting strange shadows across the small space. The dress, Lily said suddenly, her voice urgent. You need to take it back. I won't trouble your boutique anymore. Richard shook his head. It's not going back to the boutique. Fear flashed across Lily's face. Please, I didn't damage it. I was so careful. That's not what I meant, Richard interrupted gently. I meant it's not mine to take. It was Samantha's dress, and you're her mother. The simple acknowledgement, the validation of her role in Samantha's life after decades of erasure, seemed to physically transform Lily. Her shoulders straightened slightly, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. I have something for you, Jalen said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the sealed envelope from the safe, the one addressed simply, to Mom. Lily's hand trembled as she took it. Where did you find this? In Elise's private safe at the boutique, Jalen explained. It was never opened. With trembling fingers, Lily carefully broke the seal, unfolding the yellowed paper inside. As she read, silent tears tracked down her cheeks, dripping onto the hospital blanket. She forgave me, Lily whispered finally, clutching the letter to her chest, for not fighting harder to stay in her life after the divorce. She understood why it was so difficult. A sob escaped her, and she wanted me at her wedding more than anything. Richard's phone buzzed again, a text from the boutique. He ignored it, focusing instead on the elderly woman whose grief had been denied proper expression for 2 decades. Mrs. Jackson, he said, making a decision. When you're released tomorrow, I'd like to invite you to the boutique. Not for the event we planned, that's cancelled, for something else entirely. Before he could explain further, a nurse rushed in. Mr. Bennett, there's an urgent call for you at the nurse's station. Something about Elise Matthews. Richard hurried to take the call, his heart pounding. Sarah's voice was tight with emotion. Richard, Elise passed away 15 minutes ago. The hospital just called the boutique. She paused. Her last words, according to the nurse, were, she just wanted to say goodbye. The coincidental timing sent a chill through Richard. As Lily had been performing her makeshift ceremony for Samantha, Elise had taken her final breath. When he returned to Lily's bedside, she seemed to read the news on his face. Elise is gone, isn't she? She asked quietly. Richard nodded, unable to speak. Lily closed her eyes briefly. We were both her mothers, you know, in different ways, both flawed, both loving her imperfectly. She looked toward the window where the city lights twinkled against the night sky. Now neither of us has her anymore. As they prepared to leave, allowing Lily to rest, a nurse entered carrying a small vase containing a single white rose. This was just delivered for Mrs. Jackson, she explained, placing it on the bedside table. The card attached simply read, "I won't trouble you anymore." The handwriting was unmistakably Lily's own. As they stepped into the elevator, Jalen turned to Richard in confusion. "If Lily's here, who left the rose?" Richard had no answer, but a strange peace had settled over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explaining to clients why the event was cancelled, deciding the future of the boutique, and most importantly, helping Lily finally find closure. But tonight, somewhere between the stolen dress and the mysterious rose, he sensed that perhaps Samantha had finally received the farewell she deserved from both her mothers. 1 week later, Elise Bridal gleamed under soft lighting that spilled across the marble floors like liquid gold. The usual display of wedding gowns had been temporarily relocated, creating an open runway down the center of the boutique. White roses and lilies intertwined in elegant arrangements, their sweet fragrance filling the air. In place of the typical champagne service, servers circulated with cups of hot tea, Samantha's favorite Earl Grey, according to her journal. Outside, a discreet sign announced the boutique's closure for a private event, honoring the mothers behind the bride. The guest list had been completely overhauled. Gone were the socialites and fashion editors who had received the original invitations. In their place, Richard had invited current and former staff members, local designers who had known Samantha, and, most importantly, residents from the Willowbrook Senior Center where Lily had volunteered for years. In the back room, Sarah helped Lily with the final touches of her outfit, a simple but elegant blue dress that brought out the faded sapphire of her eyes. At 73, Lily carried herself with newfound dignity, her silver hair carefully styled, her weathered hands steady as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, adjusting the small corsage of white lilies on Lily's wrist. Lily smiled softly. "No, dear. After waiting 20 years, I'm just grateful." She looked at her reflection, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. "Elise would have hated this, you know." Sarah laughed. "Probably. She was particular about her vision." "That's a kind way of putting it." Lily's expression grew wistful. "But we both loved Samantha, in our own imperfect ways." A gentle knock announced Richard's arrival. He had abandoned his usual sleek designer suit in favor of a more subdued navy jacket. The past week had transformed him, the sharp edges of his ambition softened by humility and genuine remorse. "It's time," he said, offering his arm to Lily. "Are you ready?" She nodded, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. "More than ready. I've been waiting for this day since I lost her." The main showroom had filled with an eclectic mix of guests. Unlike the polished Instagram-ready crowds that typically frequented Elise Bridal, these were real people, with genuine connections to Samantha or Lily. Faces lined with experience, bodies that had lived full lives, eyes that had witnessed both joy and sorrow. They created a tapestry of humanity, far richer than any fashion show crowd. As Lily entered on Richard's arm, a hush fell over the room. Every eye turned toward her, not with the critical assessment usually reserved for brides in this space, but with respect and compassion for a mother who had been denied her rightful place in her daughter's story. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began, his voice carrying clearly through the boutique. "Today isn't about selling dresses or promoting our brand. It's about acknowledging a truth that was hidden for too long and honoring the love between a mother and daughter." He gestured toward a large portrait of Samantha that had been placed at the end of the runway, a candid photo from her college graduation, her smile radiant and unguarded. Beside it stood the dress form displaying the Samantha gown, restored to pristine condition after its brief journey to Queens. 20 years ago, Samantha Matthews was planning her wedding. She chose this dress, he indicated the gown, but she never got to wear it. After her tragic accident, this boutique was built, partially as a memorial, but somewhere along the way something vital was lost. Richard turned to Lily, genuine emotion shining in his eyes. "We forgot that weddings aren't about perfect pictures or expensive gowns. They're about family, about the people who love us." And Samantha was loved by two mothers, Elise, who built this place to preserve her memory, and Lily, who was denied the chance to properly say goodbye. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Several of the senior center residents dabbed at their eyes. "Today we're correcting that oversight," Richard continued, "not with an elaborate ceremony, but with a simple acknowledgement of Lily's place in her daughter's life and in her memory." He stepped back, gesturing toward the runway. The soft strains of Pachelbel's canon, the music Samantha had chosen for her wedding, filled the space. From the opposite end of the boutique, a young woman appeared. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair and striking blue eyes that mirrored Lily's. She wore the Samantha dress, moving with graceful steps down the runway. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her heart. The resemblance wasn't perfect, but in the gentle lighting, with the familiar music playing, the illusion was powerful enough to bring tears to her eyes. As the model reached the end of the runway, she extended her hand toward Lily, inviting her forward. For a moment, Lily hesitated, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, with strength few knew she possessed, she rose and walked toward the young woman. The music faded, leaving only silence as Lily reached out with trembling fingers to touch the dress. The fabric felt cool and smooth beneath her weathered hands, exactly as she had imagined it would feel on her daughter's wedding day. The entire room held its breath as she stood there, finally allowed to experience this moment that had been denied to her for so long. Then, unexpectedly, Lily turned to face the gathered crowd. She looked small but dignified as she accepted the microphone Richard offered. "For 20 years," she began, her voice quavering slightly before finding its strength, "I've imagined what my daughter would look like on her wedding day. I've pictured her smile, heard her laugh, felt her happiness." She paused, fighting for composure. "Elise and I were never friends. We both made mistakes, but we shared one thing. We both loved Samantha." She looked at the portrait of her daughter, her eyes filled with both grief and acceptance. "It took 20 years for me to be allowed to see my daughter in her wedding dress. But today," her voice broke momentarily, "today, she married in peace." Not a single eye remained dry as Lily placed a tender kiss on the photograph of Samantha. The simple gesture, filled with maternal love, seemed to release something that had been held captive in the boutique for 2 decades, as if the very air grew lighter, the grief less oppressive. Later, as guests mingled over tea and shared stories of Samantha, Richard approached Lily with an envelope. "Mrs. Jackson," he said formally, "I wanted to let you know that, effective immediately, the boutique will be renamed Lily and Samantha Bridal." He handed her the envelope containing the legal documents. "And we'll be establishing a foundation in Samantha's name to donate wedding dresses to mothers in vulnerable circumstances who otherwise couldn't afford to see their daughters marry." Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "That's very generous, but I don't need my name on the store." "It's not about what you need," Richard replied gently. "It's about acknowledging the truth of who Samantha was, a daughter loved by 2 mothers. And it's about making sure no other mother feels erased from her child's story." As the event wound down and the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows across Fifth Avenue, Lily stood at the boutique's window, the same window where she had first pressed her palm against the glass 1 week earlier. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, dancing in the golden light of the street lamps. Richard joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. Lily smiled, a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he'd met her. "I'm thinking that Samantha would have loved the snow on her wedding day." She turned to him, the peace in her expression almost tangible. "And I'm thinking that it's finally time for both her mothers to let her rest." As if in answer, a single snowflake landed on the window exactly where Lily's hand had pressed that first day, forming for just a moment a perfect circle before melting away. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones left untold, buried beneath years of grief and misunderstanding. Lily and Elise, 2 mothers who loved the same daughter in their own imperfect ways, remind us that healing often begins when we finally face the truth we've been avoiding. What would you have done in Richard's position? Would you have had the courage to correct a 20-year injustice once you discovered it? The barriers we build, whether glass storefronts or emotional walls, can keep us trapped in perpetual mourning. But as we saw with Lily, it's never too late to claim your rightful place in the story of someone you love. Perhaps there's someone in your own life who deserves to be acknowledged, someone whose grief has been silenced or whose love has been erased from a narrative that belongs to them too. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Every like helps more people discover these powerful stories, and your comments let us know which tales resonate most deeply with you. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complicated beauty of human connections and the healing power of truth, even when it arrives decades late.